It was supposed to be a standard hearing. The courtroom was filled with media, legal interns, and curious onlookers as former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi took the floor. She was calm, sharp as ever, prepared with files and federal documents that were about to challenge a questionable ruling made by Judge Edward Chen in a high-profile political case. But as Bondi began her statement, Judge Chen interrupted her, not once, but repeatedly. His tone dripped with sarcasm. "Ms. Bondi, I didn't realize this was a campaign rally," he said, smirking. The room tensed. Cameras rolled. Bondi paused. Her eyes narrowed, but she kept her composure. "I assure the court, I'm not here to campaign," she replied coolly. "I'm here because someone needs to hold this bench to the law." The judge chuckled dismissively. "And someone needs to remind you, Ms. Bondi, this isn't a Fox News segment." Gasps echoed across the courtroom. But Pam didn't flinch. She placed a sealed envelope on the bench. "Then I suggest you read this before you mock another officer of the court." Judge Chen rolled his eyes and waved her off, until a man in a gray suit from the back of the courtroom stood up and signaled to a group of federal marshals. The next moment would change everything. Judge Chen glanced at the marshals approaching but didn't seem concerned. "This better be good," he muttered, tearing open the sealed envelope Bondi had handed him. The courtroom went still. Inside was a certified affidavit from the Office of the Inspector General, along with an internal memo marked urgent, for immediate action. Chen's smirk began to fade. As he read, his expression shifted, first confusion, then disbelief, and finally, dread. Pam stood still, arms crossed, eyes locked on him. "You remember signing off on the Mariner Holdings case last year?" she asked, voice low but sharp. "Turns out the financial transactions linked to your ruling were traced back to a shell company owned by your brother-in-law. And you never disclosed the conflict." Murmurs broke out in the gallery. Judge Chen's hand trembled slightly. He shot a glance toward the court clerk, but no help would come from there. The clerk looked pale. The man in the gray suit, Special Agent Terrence Hall from the DOJ's Public Integrity Section, stepped forward, flashing his badge. "Judge Edward Chen, by order of the Department of Justice, you are being taken into custody pending investigation into judicial misconduct, bribery, and obstruction of justice." Gasps erupted. Court officers hesitated, then instinctively backed away. Chen stood frozen, eyes darting from Bondi to the marshals now flanking him. This is outrageous," he stammered. "I am a federal judge. And no one is above the law," Bondi replied coldly. The handcuffs clicked. As the metallic clink of handcuffs echoed through the courtroom, a surreal silence fell. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Cameras zoomed in. Judge Edward Chen, moments ago full of smug authority, now stood humiliated in front of the very court he presided over. "Let's go," Agent Hall ordered calmly. Two marshals took Judge Chen by each arm and guided him from behind the bench. His robe swayed as he walked past the jury box, his eyes avoiding the glares and cell phones pointed at him. Some jurors looked stunned. Others didn't hide their satisfaction. Pam Bondi remained by the defense table, watching him pass. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. The sight of the once untouchable judge being let out like a common criminal said more than any words could. As Chen reached the courtroom doors, someone in the back whispered, "Justice served." The doors shut behind him. Bondi finally turned back to the bench, now empty. The court clerk hesitated before standing and addressing the room. "This session is temporarily adjourned pending reassignment of a presiding judge." Pam gathered her papers, methodical and unshaken. A young law student sitting in the gallery leaned toward his friend. "Did that just really happen?" "Oh, it happened," the friend whispered. "And she just took down a federal judge, Liv." Within minutes, the courthouse lobby exploded with reporters shouting questions. "Ms. Bondi. Was this a setup? Did you coordinate this arrest with the DOJ? Is Judge Chen going to prison? Pam Bondi stepped up to the microphones, flanked by 2 aides and several federal agents now standing watch. Her tone was firm, measured. "I didn't come here to make headlines. I came here to uphold the law." What happened in that courtroom was the result of months of investigation and cooperation with federal agencies who still believe in integrity and accountability, no matter who's wearing the robe. Cameras flashed. A murmur of respect moved through the crowd. Behind her, news alerts were already lighting up phone screens. Breaking: Federal Judge Edward Chen arrested in courtroom sting live. Pam Bondi exposes judicial corruption. Video goes viral inside the courthouse. The clerk's office was buzzing. Staff were scrambling to reassign Judge Chen's docket while security combed through his chambers, seizing files and devices. An emergency session was called at the Ninth Circuit Administrative Office. Meanwhile, back in Washington, D.C., several sitting judges and members of the Judiciary Committee were already making frantic calls, wondering if they were next. And Pam? She walked calmly to her black SUV, escorted by plainclothes officers. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. But she knew exactly what message had been sent. By nightfall, the story had taken over every major news outlet. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, each was playing the courtroom clip on a loop. Judge Edward Chen humiliated, arrested, and removed in handcuffs after mocking Pam Bondi on record. Twitter, or X, as it was now called, was ablaze. Hashtags like #JudgeChenArrested, #BondiStrikesBack, and #CourtroomJustice trended globally. In legal circles, panic spread like wildfire. Whispers of other judges under quiet investigation began circulating. Anonymous sources told Politico that Bondi's appearance was just phase 1 of a larger federal crackdown. At the Department of Justice, a late-night press briefing confirmed it. Judge Chen was one of several officials linked to an ongoing federal bribery probe tied to political influence schemes stretching from California to D.C. But what truly made waves was the rumor. According to leaked internal documents, it wasn't just Chen. 3 more names were reportedly on Bondi's sealed list. And each held high-ranking judicial positions. By the next morning, Pam Bondi was back in Florida, her team already prepping the next filing. She gave no interviews. No victory lap. Just one short post on social media: "The bench is not a shield. If you wear the robe, wear it clean." Pam Bondi. The message was clear. And Washington was officially on notice. Inside Capitol Hill, the atmosphere had turned electric, and not in a good way. Senators on both sides of the aisle were whispering in backrooms, scheduling emergency meetings with legal advisors. Calls flooded into the Judicial Ethics Committee. A classified memo leaked to congressional staffers confirmed their worst fears. Bondi's team had been working alongside an internal DOJ task force called Project Gavel, a secret initiative targeting corruption within the judiciary itself. And Bondi wasn't just helping. She was the face of it. "She's not just taking scalps," one anonymous senator told a Hill reporter. "She's pulling out roots." Meanwhile, Judge Edward Chen was being held in a secure federal facility under 24-hour watch. His initial arraignment had been sealed. Rumors suggested he was already naming names in exchange for a lighter sentence. Back in Florida, Bondi was quietly meeting with former federal prosecutors, whistleblowers, and insiders who had been too afraid to speak, until now. Each brought documentation. Each had stories about intimidation, pay-to-play politics, and rulings influenced by backroom deals. The scope was widening. Fast. And in the middle of it all, Pam Bondi remained calm, composed, and completely unmoved by the chaos she had ignited. Because this wasn't about politics anymore. It was about purging the rot. Just after midnight, an encrypted file was leaked to a group of investigative journalists at the Federal Ledger. The file, allegedly sourced from inside the DOJ, contained a partial list of judges and officials under active investigation as part of Project Gavel. While most names were redacted, 3 stood out in full: Judge Marla Henderson, U.S. District Court, Northern District of Illinois; Judge Raymond Torres, U.S. Court of Appeals, Fifth Circuit Chief Magistrate Alan Bryce, Eastern District of Pennsylvania. The leak hit like a political earthquake. By sunrise, news vans were parked outside federal courthouses in 3 states. Clerks called in sick. Judges canceled public appearances. Talk of recusals, emergency reviews, and judicial shutdowns flooded legal newsrooms. Inside the DOJ, leadership was split, some furious over the leak, others relieved that public pressure might force quicker resignations. And in Florida, Pam Bondi was already 3 steps ahead. She held a press conference, brief, surgical, powerful. There is no joy in seeing members of the judiciary fall. But there is duty. And my duty is to the Constitution, not to career titles. If more names are revealed, know this, it is not political revenge. It is justice long delayed, but not denied. The crowd went silent. Then one reporter shouted, "Ms. Bondi, how many more judges are on the list?" Pam looked directly into the camera. Enough to make DC nervous. By the end of the week, the backlash began. Several political operatives and legal commentators, particularly those aligned with Judge Chen's former allies, went on the offensive. Major media outlets aired segments questioning Bondi's motivations, labeling her campaign as vigilante justice dressed in a legal suit. An op-ed in The Atlantic even accused her of weaponizing judicial accountability for political theater. But Bondi didn't flinch. Behind the scenes, she had already anticipated this storm. Her legal team released a 300-page digital dossier to the public, documenting years of evidence, sealed memos, whistleblower affidavits, and money trail analyses that linked corrupt rulings to undisclosed financial interests. It shut the critics down overnight. Even former skeptics admitted, this wasn't political posturing. It was a coordinated anti-corruption operation with receipts. Still, the pushback had consequences. A scheduled federal hearing was abruptly cancelled after anonymous threats were phoned into the courthouse. One DOJ official connected to Project Gavel was placed under protective detail after a suspicious break-in at his home. Pam Bondi herself received multiple security threats. Her team increased private security, and she began traveling under U.S. Marshal protection. At a private roundtable, one DOJ official was overheard saying, "She knew this would get ugly. And she still walked right into it." The message was clear, the battle wasn't just legal anymore. It was personal. And Pam wasn't backing down. 2 weeks after Judge Chen's arrest, something shifted. The Chief Justice of the United States issued an unprecedented public statement: while the judiciary must remain independent, it is not immune from scrutiny. Allegations of misconduct, when supported by evidence, deserve full investigation and consequence. Though carefully worded, the message signaled what insiders already knew: the highest levels of the judicial system were now taking Pam Bondi seriously. Meanwhile, Judge Marla Henderson quietly resigned from her bench late Friday evening, no press, no statement, just a brief court filing and a closed-door departure. Within hours, Judge Raymond Torres filed a motion to delay all his active cases indefinitely, citing health reasons. But perhaps the most unexpected twist came when a bipartisan group of senators, once openly critical of Bondi, announced a new subcommittee to re-examine judicial accountability practices in light of recent federal investigations. That same day, Pam Bondi received a handwritten letter from a retired federal judge. It read, "I watched you dismantle a wall we never thought would crack. Thank you. For the sake of law itself, don't stop." She kept the letter in her briefcase. That evening, in a quiet office with shades drawn and documents spread across her desk, Pam picked up the next sealed folder. Inside was another name. And another plan. The mission wasn't over. It had just reached the heart of the system. The next hearing was held in a sealed federal courtroom in D.C., no press, no cameras, only those with high-level clearance were allowed inside. Pam Bondi sat at the prosecution table, flanked by agents from the DOJ's Internal Investigations Unit. Across from her, Chief Magistrate Alan Bryce, pale and silent, his attorney whispering frantically in his ear. This wasn't a trial. Not yet. It was an emergency evidentiary session, one that would determine whether Bryce would be immediately suspended from the bench or face criminal referral. Pam stood and presented the final puzzle piece: audio recordings, bank transfers, confidential emails, proof of rulings manipulated in exchange for undisclosed political donations routed through nonprofit shells. Every claim was cross-verified, time-stamped, and certified. It took less than 2 hours. When she finished, no one in the room spoke for several seconds. The presiding judge, brought in from a separate circuit, finally removed his glasses and said, "This court is left with no choice but to refer Chief Magistrate Bryce for full criminal proceedings and immediate removal from all federal responsibilities." Pam nodded once. No celebration. No smile. Just justice. Outside the courthouse, as word leaked out, a crowd had already gathered. Protesters, supporters, legal scholars, they all stood silently as Bondi emerged. Microphones were thrust forward, but she spoke only one sentence: corruption wore a robe. Now, it wears handcuffs. Then she walked away, the Capitol dome glowing behind her in the dusk. The system wasn't perfect. It never had been. But for the first time in a long time, it remembered what accountability looked like. Weeks passed. Then months. But the tremors of what Pam Bondi had unleashed didn't fade, they multiplied. Dozens of judicial reviews were quietly reopened across the country. Federal oversight committees, once dismissed as ceremonial, began issuing subpoenas with real teeth. A new legislative bill, the Judicial Transparency Act, sailed through Congress with rare bipartisan support, requiring mandatory financial disclosures for all federal judges and lifetime bans on ruling in cases tied to undisclosed family interests. Law schools began adding new ethics modules inspired by the Bondi Doctrine, a case study in constitutional accountability. Pam herself declined all talk show appearances, book deals, and even an offer to run for Senate. She returned to private legal work, but her name remained a quiet warning to those who believed power made them untouchable. Years later, in a lecture hall at Georgetown, a professor would tell her class, Bondi didn't just expose corruption. She reminded the system it could bleed, and then demanded it heal. And somewhere, in a locked DOJ archive labeled Project Gavel, closed, sat the sealed names of those who cooperated, confessed, or simply resigned in silence. Justice had not been perfect. But it had been undeniable. And for once, the bench was cleaner because one woman dared to confront it, head-on. A year to the day after Judge Edward Chen was led out in handcuffs, the Supreme Court chamber was filled to capacity, not for a ruling, but for a ceremony. Pam Bondi stood near the front, quiet and composed, as the Chief Justice presented her with the Medal of Civic Merit, a rarely awarded recognition for individuals who restore public trust through unwavering service to the Constitution. As he placed the medal around her neck, he said, "You didn't challenge the judiciary. You challenged the rot that hid within it. And in doing so, you reminded this country that justice is not fragile, it's forged in fire." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Later that evening, as Pam walked alone through the quiet marble halls of the Supreme Court, she paused by a portrait of the late Justice Scalia. For a moment, she simply stared. Not with pride. Not with anger. But with a sense of closure. Because justice isn't just delivered in verdicts or headlines. It's found in the silence that follows a storm, when the truth has been spoken, and no one dares to lie again. Pam Bondi had done what few thought possible. She made the system look in the mirror. And it blinked.